Hello and welcome to Truly Tragic Transits. My name is Rebecca Lovatt. I am your astrologer and human design guide for this episode, and today we are going to be looking at the untimely death of the beloved Matthew Perry, or Chandler from Friends, and looking to understand really nailing down actually this connection between potential energy and triggered energy. So what potential does someone have within their birth chart, whether that's from a human design perspective or an astrology perspective or an astrocartography perspective, and then having a look at what was going on at the time to understand the triggered effects. Now, I have my beloved dog Bonnie with me today, who you may well hear in the background. She is currently walking around with her donut teddy and making it a little bit of a scene. So clearly she wanted to be heard and seen and witnessed during this episode recording. So without further ado, let's have a look at Matthew Perry, who passed away on the 28th of October 2023 in LA. I want to start by looking at his potential energy. So from a human design perspective, he had a lot of strengths within his chart, and I think this is something that we can often overlook, especially when I'm talking about choice and consequence and potential energy. You know, I tend to focus very often on the shadow parts of that, but what is really clear to me is how much talent and how much skill he also had, and this is the balance that we get with astrology, right? A lot of the time we are looking at potential energy. A lot of the time we're looking at shadows. A lot of the time we're looking at things that, what's gone wrong? What's trying to get our attention? You know, what is this illness trying to show me? And we forget that there's a lot of amazing potential energy in there as well, not just the shadow energy. So in terms of what he had, he was a generator. He was a 2-4 generator, pure generator. What does that mean? Well, he was here to spread joy. If you are a generator, you make up 35% of the population. And there's a really simple task for the generator, that they need to find joy and they need to spread it. Now, if joy isn't found, then they're spreading other energy apart from joy. So a generator's job really is to spread. So it's really important for generators to be aware of their energy that they're spreading. And look, Matthew Perry, we know as Chandler from Friends, he is often voted as the most favourite, if not the most favourite, definitely in the top 2 of the Friends characters. So we know that he spread a lot of joy to people's lives, and he really fulfilled that as part of his potential. He had a main gate of gate 29, which is about devotion to things that light you up specifically, and it's this real nod to mastering the craft. And he had that within his chart. That was his main gate. So whenever he had something that lit him up, whenever he had that potential shift in energy, that joy that he found, he also had the ability to master that and to stay devoted to it. Something that kind of kept him anchored in a world where sometimes we're missing anchor and we're missing purpose. He had a few defined centers. So he had a defined ego center, willpower, so he had a lot of motivation in his chart. Whenever we think of the ego center, sometimes it gets a bit of a bad rep, but what it actually is about motivation. He had a lot of motivation, he had a lot of willpower. You know, look what he made of his life whilst it was here. He had that potential within it. He had a defined G center, so very strong sense of self, which kind of makes sense because all that we know about his character in Friends is that he was playing himself. You know, it was very similar sort of energy to what he already had that he was carrying through with him. And he also had that defined sacral, so very much gut orientated, gut responses, showed his enthusiasm, showed his excitement through his expression of his, not necessarily his voice, but the expression of his body. And that makes a lot of sense as well with an undefined throat. You know, his excitement or his joy wouldn't necessarily have come through his voice, but would have come through his body much more strongly. And we see that in the style of acting that he brought. He brought this very clown-like, this very expressive, bodily expressive form of acting, form of comedic acting, slapstick, very slapstick. Put a lot of his body into that, which is beautiful. So I really wanted to celebrate the strengths that he had, because I'm aware that in some of the other charts, we have leaned towards the shadow elements first, and I think it's important to recognize those strengths. He was also a 2-4, which means they had a real naturalness to his energy, a real flow, very easy for him to make connections, very easy for him to make friends. And coming across very naturally in those environments where he would have felt himself, where he would have felt safe, and where he would have felt at ease. And he really emphasized this 2-line, this naturalness, this natural talent, natural gift, natural skill. How can I really emphasize using that? He made a lot of headway with that. So he was born on the 19th of August 1969, making him a Leo. I'm very biased. I am also a Leo. We're the best. I'm joking. And what I want to have a look at really now is those two parts of the potential energy that formed almost like his downfall of sorts, the places where he was vulnerable, the places where he would have needed support. So I want to look at that firstly from a human design perspective. Now, he had a lot of undefined centers. Whenever I am looking at a chart and I'm seeing undefined centers, I see what story is sat in there. What is the story that often takes over from the natural energy that is being amplified through that energetic body? And he had an undefined root, an undefined solar plexus, an undefined spleen, throat, third eye, and head. So 6 out of the 9 centers undefined. That's a lot of potential influential energy to get into his body, be amplified. And what happens with that is that we can forget or lose ourselves, our inherent gifts, the things that I mentioned first, those natural skills, because we become so heavy with the conditioning of the environment or of the people that we are with, that takes over from our naturalness. So the stories of those centers, we have an undefined root, which is the story of pressure and feeling like you're having to do something, or perhaps lacking get up and go, needing to rest for certain periods, being susceptible to adrenal burnout. We have the solar plexus. This is the story of avoidance and emotional suppression, and I think this is really important. Whenever someone has an undefined solar plexus or an ESP, emotional solar plexus, what can happen is they play out a story of emotional avoidance. So instead of recognizing their emotions and working with their nervous system, they can use all sorts of tools to suppress their emotions, because emotions are felt more intensely, more often, more sensitively and more empathically than someone with a defined solar plexus. And so what that means is we have this explosion almost of emotion, which can be painful for people to deal with on a daily basis. And we do see a lot of emotional suppression tactics come in, not just with the defined emotional centers, but with the undefined emotional centers, but for very different reasons. The spleen tends to be the story of finding it hard to change, or when change is thrust upon us, when things are taken away from us. We can struggle with the undefined spleen because it wants stability and it wants safety. So once any sort of safety net is taken away, the undefined spleen is going to struggle with that, because it's going to try and find something else to find safety from. Now, for a lot of people, that ends up being good things. It might be that they put in workout routines, they might start eating healthier, they might find a job that gives them that stability that they need, they might find a house that's more suited to them. But it can also go the opposite way, and we look to things that provide us false sense of safety and false sense of security. He had an undefined throat, so struggling with words, struggling with either feeling like they need to have attention all the time, or feeling really uncomfortable being in the spotlight. And I'm gonna go with the latter for that, because he had a caves environment style. And when you have a caves environment style, I think Heath Ledger also had this, but I would have to go back and check. There's this need for safety all of the time. And when we cannot control our environment or the people around us, it becomes very difficult to keep control of that safety. You know, who has access to me, who doesn't have access to me, that suddenly gets blown out of proportion because everyone suddenly has access to you if you're a celebrity. So for cave celebrities, we very often see a difficulty dealing with the spotlight. And Heath Ledger, I'm pretty sure Prince Harry as well. There's a few others that I had in mind. There's quite a few people that are caves personalities and or caves environments, and we see them really struggle with not just being in the spotlight, but with who has access to them. How can people access them? And with social media, that becomes more difficult. He also had Undefined Third Eye. This is a story of needing to be certain, or the story of needing to have answers, needing to work things out, needing to have mental security. And the Head, story of pressure, having to work it all out. And this is a real... he's got 2 pressure centres undefined. So any sort of pressure that he would have felt would have been amplified, and not necessarily realistic pressure to what was going on at the time. So I wanted to just add that human design aspect to it, because it will also give you some things to reflect back on your chart as well. You know, what do I see within my chart? How can I start to work with some of these centres and the stories that sit in those centres to really understand myself a lot better? You know, am I acting from a place of authenticity, or am I acting from a place of conditioning? And I think that's a really important story or question that we can ask ourselves going forwards. Am I acting authentically in this situation, or am I acting from my conditioning? Now, when we look at his astrology chart, there is a lot going on. A lot going on. He has a lot of potential energy, shall we say. So whenever I look at someone's birth chart, there's a few things that I would first look at. First thing is, what squares and oppositions have they got going on? If they've got a lot of red lines going on, I know that they're probably coming because they're struggling with something. And we can start to have a look at the chart with that. The other thing that I also look for is what's happening, you know, with these kind of celebrity deaths, shocking deaths. I'm interested in what's happening with Chiron and Lilith, and we've seen those play out pretty well so far over the first series. Lilith, very prominent in the Whitney Houston story. Chiron, very prominent in the other stories that we've followed. I'm also usually interested in Uranus. It's a shocking energy. I'm also very interested in the kind of more Pluto, Neptune, Saturn sort of vibes, because they give us different energies, but they give us different struggles. So when we look at Matthew Perry's birth chart, the first thing that sticks out is Chiron opposed Jupiter. Now, if Chiron is our Achilles heel, if Chiron is our weak point, or a place where someone can be poked and they're an easy target, and it's opposed Jupiter, one of the first things that comes to my mind is that any sort of quick expansion is going to be tricky and needs some form of management. Now, the reason being is that Jupiter is sat in Libra, so expansion needing to be balanced, or expansion highlighting the need for balance, opposed Chiron, which is our weakness. Now, what it kind of looks like is it's also very, very, very close to Uranus, the shocking energy. So what we can start to understand from that is, if this is someone who needs to be very careful with balance because it's going to expose some sort of weakness within their chart, if this is someone who needs that support and they did a job where their success blew up pretty much overnight. You know, I was watching the Friends reunion on Sky recently, and they were talking about how it was only really after that first series that they were kind of catapulted from 0 to 100. Suddenly, everyone knew where they lived. They had helicopters above their house. Everyone was having the Rachel haircut. I think it's very difficult for us kind of normal people to get our head around what that would have been like on a mental level. You know, if this is someone who already had that weakness or potential weakness around quick expansion, this is someone who would have really struggled. And we saw that come out as the story of Matthew Perry unfolded with his addictions throughout the series to different drugs, alcohol, ways of coping, which ultimately shows in his chart, you know, this quick expansion energy. Now, the thing that it does highlight in the chart, you know, how can we work with that, is not to avoid quick expansion, but it's to make sure that support systems are in place when quick expansion happens. So if it's in the third house, Jupiter, Uranus are both in the third house, this is very mind-heavy energy. So this is a real need to support the mind, to support mental health, to support emotional health, to support a person who, if they are going through this big change, their mind is going to be vulnerable with this Chiron opposition. And Chiron sat in the ninth house, so this weakness or this Achilles heel of adventure or misadventure, and I spoke about this in the Jimi Hendrix, the 27 Club one. The ninth house can be adventure or misadventure, and if we've got that weakness, you know, if we've got that riskiness that comes in with the ninth house of trying new things, being interested in travel, being interested in going somewhere new, trying out a new place, trying out a new thing, there is already this picture that is forming of, okay, how could that have been supported? And this is why I'm going to keep banging the drum for astrology and human design to be really integrated into mental health support, health services, careers, any sort of thing like that, because we can start to see actually what's going on behind what someone might be presenting with. He also had Pluto conjunct the South Node, and this was in the second house with Virgo. Now, when I was planning for this podcast, I did read that he was an absolute perfectionist. He has Mercury in Virgo, which is natural communication, naturally expressive, comes out very naturally to that person. But with that South Node and Pluto conjunct, firstly, that could mean that he's bringing gifts from a past life. So if we're going down the spiritual route, that past life transformation coming through. It's also the opportunity to rid ourselves of past life baggage, and this might have been where that Chiron influence came in as well. But in Virgo, in the second house, we've got this opportunity to really transform our mind. Virgo being very heavily linked to the healer, and so we've got this opportunity to deeply transform who we are with that healing quality, heal ourselves, heal our soul on a soul level, heal ourselves. And in the second house, we've got it with values, money, people who we hang around with, people who are in our environment, this kind of wider. The second house is very representative of luxury, and for me, when I'm seeing that together, it's this kind of classic combination of what am I being drawn to and why am I being drawn to it? Because if I can understand that, I can also understand, is this my conditioning or is this me? Now, Matthew Perry is someone with a caves environment. They tend to not be that bothered about luxury caves environments. They like nice things, and they like things that will stand the test of time, but they don't need an abundance of it. There's only so much that they need. If you think about a cave as an environment, there's only so much you can put in a cave. So I would be very interested to understand as well, what that kind of abundance felt like to him when he went from being an unknown quantity to someone very well known and very, very wealthy very quickly. Because it almost leaves this portal or this sucking energy for the wrong sort of people to come in with that Pluto and South Node. It's almost like I'm dragging my past back with me, which is uncomfortable. He also had Venus conjunct Lilith. So we see Lilith crop back into these stories of vulnerabilities. Lilith being that wild, uncontrollable nature of ourselves. So he was wild and uncontrollable in the 12th house, which is mysterious, secretive. We're not quite sure what's going on. And this again was reflected in his career. It wasn't really until after, I don't think, the filming of Friends that really all this stuff about his addiction and his drugs and alcohol started to come out. People close to him would have noticed, but there was this secretive nature to it, which is very 12th house. It's also very 8th house where his North Node is. Very watery Scorpio and Pisces qualities to it. And he had the Moon and Neptune in his 4th house, and Scorpio. So his emotions really would have been highly sensitive, as I've already mentioned, with that undefined solar plexus anyway. Highly mysterious, highly secretive, risky behaviour in that 4th house in the home. Now, when you read about his past, and he had quite a rough childhood by all accounts, it wasn't so much that I think it was a relatively privileged upbringing in terms of money and wealth, but in terms of love and satisfaction and home life, it was tricky. So a lot of emotional energy, a lot of mysterious energy, but a lot of opportunity for transformation within the home as well, and being able to transcend the weight that had been carried forwards with that Scorpio element added in there. So there was a lot of potential energy there to be triggered. Now, I suspect he wasn't someone who was opposed to counselling or speaking about things, or it sounds like he had a good amount of help. So in between that time when he was clean from the kind of end of Friends, or whenever it was that he started to clean himself up from his drugs and alcohol, to his death, what happened? What was happening with this potential energy? Now, one of my theories is with that Jupiter and Uranus, that quick expansion, and then it was kind of taken away. They went on this whirlwind journey for 10 years together. They had this family as well. We come back to those kind of woundings and potential for triggers in the 4th house as well. Family was unconventional in that sense. His friends, cast members, were his family. And with this Jupiter and Uranus shock expansion, expanding quickly, promoting or provoking these wounds of Chiron in the 9th house of adventure, misadventure, risky behaviour, there's a lot in there to me that says when this Friends roller coaster was over, he would have been left without his anchor of his family. And that's really uncomfortable, because it's almost like, how do you get around that? You know, you really need to know someone's either psychology or charts to look out for when people may be more vulnerable than others. Now, they did the reunion show, you know, it would have been maybe a year or so before he died, maybe 18 months before he died. So that family aspect could have been re-triggered again. I don't see that as a negative thing, but there's that potential for the emotional energy to come back up again. And then I want to look now at the triggered energy on the day. You know, what was happening in LA at the time that would have sparked this potential energy into the flames of the fire, and ultimately meant that his soul passed at that time. So he died on the 28th of October 2023 at 4:17 p.m. LA time. What was happening in the sky at that time? Well, Mars was opposed Jupiter at 11 degrees. So Jupiter was in Taurus. If Jupiter was in Taurus, this is expansion of really this expansion of earthliness, as in arts, culture, beauty, aesthetics, how things look, love. So there's that part of it. But if it was opposed Mars in Scorpio, we've also got this energy to look at of Mars being on the shadow side of it, impulsive, reckless in Scorpio, which is a water sign, risky with life and death. So we've got this expansion and this this contrast between the safety of Earth, and his Earth, Taurus, sits in his 10th house, so legacy, opposed this risky behaviour of the water being risky. Now, we know he drowned from a ketamine overdose. The first thing I want to float past is, would that have happened if he was on land rather than in the water? The riskiness of the water. Mars in Scorpio, riskiness of water. It was also at 11 degrees, and the 11th degree is linked to Uranus. So we have this Uranus energy coming back again. Uranus energy being disruptive, shaking things up, being unpredictable, being shocking, being surprising. And knowing as well that this death occurred a few hours before the closing portal of the eclipse season in 2023. Also, for me, throws this karmic energy into the mix. And in his birth chart, he'd got that karmic energy of Pluto and the South Node conjunct in the second house of values and money, other people's money, and who we trust, who we love, who we trust with our life. You know, Pluto, life, who we trust with our life. And so it raises this question around responsibility. Whose responsibility is this? And again, with this karmic element and knowing what came up after this, you know, this whole underworld of ketamine fueled parties, addictions, celebrity culture in LA, where we've sadly just had the fires. We've got all of this energy that is looking very karmic with the timing of the eclipse. And for me, that eclipse was a very, it was the first eclipse that I really started to take notice of very seriously. We did have the death of Matthew Perry, and that did shock me. I was a massive Friends fan. But closer to home, we had a really shocking accident in the ice hockey. So I live in between Nottingham and Sheffield, and it was Sheffield versus Nottingham at the ice hockey in Sheffield. And we had a really, really shocking death on the ice of a player who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and their throat was cut on the ice and they died. And this is, again, for me, when we're talking about this Taurus, Scorpio, when we're talking about this earth versus water, the full moon at that time was also going to be in Taurus, earth. The death was on the ice. Matthew Perry's death was in the water. We've got this water and earth qualities that came in with that moon. And what it really reminded me was this need. I mean, eclipses are always about balance, but also this need, this reminder that we are absolutely at the mercy of nature. You know, where are we meant to be? What are we meant to be doing? How can we make sure that our feet are firmly on the ground? And I'm not saying don't go swimming or don't go to hot tub or don't go ice skating, but what are we using those things for? And if we're using those things for escapism, we need to get our feet back on the ground. And so that was a really, really, really powerful full moon for me, to highlight a lot of the astrological timelines that were going on. So the moon was square Pluto at 27 degrees as well on that day. So we had this energy of Pluto, transformation, death, rebirth, risk, with the moon, emotional volatility. Our emotions at a full moon are always heightened because they leave it. It's a gravitational pull that's pulling us in different directions. We're being pulled towards the sun, the moon, and the earth. So we're being stretched. Our bodies are being stretched, which allows for our water body, our emotional body, to be more vulnerable and more exposed. So we had that energy as well, more exposing. The moon, as he passed, was not quite in Taurus yet. It was in Aries. And in Aries, it is our emotions cause recklessness. Our emotions cause us to be impulsive, not doing things from grounded action. We're doing things from this reckless space. And at 27 degrees, this is also activating the mind of Gemini. So our mental health then becomes extremely important at that time, because if we are vulnerable to this recklessness and impulsivity and our mind is not in a great place, Pluto is coming into that with a square and being like, well, the opportunity is here for transformation, but it can go either way. Which way is it going to go with Pluto? Pluto is unpredictable in that sense, in that it's there to take us to the edges of our existence. And that doesn't mean to say that every time Pluto's activated or you're on a Pluto line that there's a possibility of death. Of course not, that would be crazy. But what it is to say is that if you're not acting from a grounded place, the risk becomes even riskier, even more unpredictable, even more reckless, because you've not just got that Aries moon activated, you've also got Pluto in the mix with Gemini at 27 degrees, this mind energy, expanding this potential energy into tragedy. We also had Mercury conjunct Mars in Scorpio. So Mercury being the messenger, ruler of the mind, with Mars in Scorpio, Mars being action-based. You know, it's a doer, but it's also linked to that reckless energy. So reckless mind, if we've got those two together, reckless mind in Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto, reckless mind leading to risky, adverse behavior that takes us to the edges of what we can cope with as a human, what our body is capable of doing. And, with that, with the earth energy that was being activated as well, that Taurus energy that was about to come in with the moon, it's that reminder that we are not immortal. We have limits, we have edges, we are earthbound, we have a body to look after. And it's that reminder that, even people who we think have the most amazing life, lots of money, riches, wealth, they're celebrated and they're seen, also have the limitations of being human as well. And again, this is another reason why astrology can help with us understanding that. The full moon was going to be at 5 degrees of Taurus, which would have been conjunct his natal Saturn and opposed his natal moon. So instantly we've also got themes coming in, very intense themes coming in around his childhood, father wounds, discipline. That's discipline of himself, not just discipline that other people inflict on us. And also this emotional wave being triggered by this as well. If you've got a moon, a natal moon being activated, it's almost like this purging. It's this emotional purging energy that starts to come up. So we had that at play on the day. And his natal Lilith, which sat in Cancer, was square the transiting Chiron in Aries. So for me, that highlights struggles with the weaknesses that we have, our Achilles heel, struggles with the weaknesses, but also a letting go of control or a loss of control. Whenever Lilith is in the picture, there is this uncontrollable element to it. I am out of control with my weaknesses. I am out of control with my coping mechanisms. I am out of control with my Achilles heel, the things that I know are my downfall. And there's this out of control nature that Lilith brings in. So all of that is to say that there was a lot going on outside of this karmic cleansing that an eclipse season brings. Within his own chart, there was a lot going on. And then the icing on top of the cake, as always, is the astrocartography. What was happening in LA where he died? Well, Matthew Perry's personal chart, so his birth chart for the astrocartography, shows that LA is not somewhere that has major lines running close to it. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about he's not got any of his main lines of his planets running close to LA where he lived. But what he did have was a lot of aspected lines. Aspected lines are almost like mirrored or reflected lines, so that they're slightly weaker. But with all of them together, it creates this soupy sandwich sort of energy of coming and going, not sure if I'm on the right path, not sure who I am today. And it's almost like this split personality that comes in with it. Because there's lots of different parts of our personality that are being activated by different planets. And with him, he had aspect lines of Uranus, surprising, shocking, unpredictable. Mars, again, risky. Pluto, taking me to the edges. Saturn, looking at highlighting my need for discipline or lack of discipline, or highlighting the tendencies that I had with discipline. And we know that he was a perfectionist. So what was that covering up? What needed help with? What did he need help with? The sun, which is our chance to shine, and his natal sun would have been in Leo, so needing to be in the spotlight, and the moon. So this emotional energy coming to the surface as well. Now, that's 6 lines. That's a lot of energy. That's a lot of different parts of our birth chart being activated in one very small place. Chaotic. Very chaotic. At the time of his death as well, what was it about LA that with all of this energy that was triggered within the birth chart, what was it about LA specifically that was going on? And at the time of his death, Neptune was in 25 degrees of Pisces. So Neptune, the planet, was sat in Pisces at 25 degrees, which was trine his natal Neptune and conjunct his natal North Node at 25 degrees. 25 degrees, by the way, is linked to Aries. This recklessness, impulsivity, again coming in with this triggered energy. But Neptune, the line of Neptune on the astrocartography map, was directly over LA when he died. Neptune is a planet of water. He died in an accident in water. Neptune rules mystery. In very mysterious circumstances he died. And it's also uncovered this underworld, this undercurrent of ketamine drugs in LA. I get shivers when I think about that, because there is so much emphasis on the underworld, on mystery, on things that we didn't see before, on, you know, the trial and things dragging out because we needed to get to the bottom of it. It makes me really uncomfortable when people die on their Neptune line specifically, because I'm never quite sure if we will get to the bottom of it. I'm never quite sure if we will know the circumstances of exactly what happened, because I always describe Neptune, the shadow of Neptune, as like the invisibility cloak in Harry Potter. It shrouds things in mystery so that when it's there, when the energy is there, it's like no one gets to peek behind the curtain. I think the other really sad thing for me that Matthew Perry's death highlighted was the importance of karmic consequence when we are close to our nodal returns or nodal opposition. So he was really, really close to a nodal return. He was so close to having those lessons cemented. And we know he went on this massive journey of recovery as an addict. And it was so sad that he was so close to the end of that journey. And I feel like if he had a cheerleader who knew the astrology and knew what was going on, that could be like, look, you're so close to this chapter closing now. There are going to be things that come up that are going to trigger you in this period, because that's how we overcome the challenge for good. But the opportunity was really there. And I really do believe that if he had known that, we may well be sitting here under very different circumstances today. So again, for me, it's this truly tragic transits really highlights the need for us to be talking about astrology, to be talking about the moon, to be talking about astrocartography and human design. Really, what they are tools for self-awareness. We need to have a much greater awareness of ourselves and of others, you know, our family members, so that we can help them. We can help people going through these challenging times and show them what's going on so that they can work with the energy and work through the energy. So do I think this death could be avoided? Yeah. I think this was quite an obvious one to be pointing out. I don't think it was necessarily to do with LA, the place. You know, from the other episodes, we've really seen a heightened emphasis on the place being important. I don't think for Matthew Perry this was necessarily about the place. I think it was about the demons coming back, that Lilith placement, that Chiron placement being activated, and the moon really just emphasizing this karmic nature to our purpose. And he leaves behind a legacy, you know, of childhood fun for many people. Friends will always be part of our lives, right? So thank you for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed that one. This one I didn't script for, because I really wanted to try and get across the vulnerability of this chart. So I hope that you have enjoyed it. Please like and rate and subscribe, and tell your friends about truly tragic transits so that we can start to educate people on why this is important, because I really strongly believe that it is important for us to understand going forwards. And the next episode is going to be quite a raw one, we're going to look at the death of Liam Payne from One Direction, which was a very recent death, but I feel like it follows on beautifully from this one because it was also at a time of the eclipse season, very, very close to the eclipse season, and ties into very similar themes of this one. So I hope you can join me for the next episode. Until then, like, share, rate, leave comments, and yeah, I'm wishing you a lovely day, whatever you are doing. Thank you for listening.